So here's the game. You're in a circle of 10 people and you're split into 2 teams. The 7 of you versus the 3 of them. Probably like the sound of your chances, right? Well, here's the thing. You don't know who's not on your team, and one of you has just been murdered by them. Your job is simple. Work together to work out who's on the opposing team and vote them out before they murder all of you. Your problem is that all the players on the opposition team are posing as your teammates and will try to lie and manipulate you so that you don't vote them out. You take it in turns, and since they've just had their go, it's your go now, but oh no, one wrong guess and you've eliminated your own teammate and they've just eliminated another one, and then suddenly it's a 4v3 and oh no, you've been voted out! Now, the chances are you're probably somewhat familiar with this format. You've either played a game like this before or you've watched one play out. And the general concept behind this is that the uninformed majority will more than likely lose to the informed minority. And by that I mean esteemed computer scientists in 2006, being Mark Braverman, Omid Etasami, and Elkanan Mossel, literally proved this, saying the 2 groups have comparable probabilities of winning exactly when the population size is R and the Mafia size is of order square root of R. Which is basically a very long-winded way of saying that in a game, even when there's more of you, you're still at a disadvantage if you are clueless to what's going on, making what is called a social deduction game. And I feel like in recent years, this game format has been everywhere. On the one hand, it's a growing genre in the video game world. A quick look at the social deduction game Wikipedia page will tell you that. At the start of the 2000s, there was a few of them. Every now and again, a game developer would try their hand at it. Then suddenly, less than 10 years ago, there was just a boom, and several are being made a year. But then, on the other hand, more pressingly for this video, I feel like this style of game has just become the most popular and trendy format for reality shows. And I think in recent years, this all started with the Dutch reality show that came out in 2021, De Verraders, or the Traitors. Which, if you somehow aren't familiar, this is essentially the exact same structure and style of game that I described earlier, where the faithfuls have to work out who the traitors are before they all get murdered. This show was a massive success in the Netherlands, and as of now there are 25 international versions of it, with 10 more announced to be released around the world, making a total of 35. And based on my channel's geographical demographics, I believe over 90% of people watching this video right now should have a version of this show in their country. And now, if you can't tell, I'm British, so I'm most familiar with our version of the show, and I cannot even put into words how popular this show is with young people. Or people like me. I'm still young, okay, pushing 30 people. Us, maybe a little bit older than younger people used to be. But used to be young people not too long ago. And I mean, it's literally achieved record-breaking viewership numbers, making it one of, if not the most viewed TV show in the UK so far this year. But it isn't just this one show making younger people come back to TV. If you just go on YouTube, there are hugely successful series of people just playing the game Among Us, which again, if you somehow don't know, is a video game revolving around this exact concept where the crewmates have to catch the imposters before they all get murdered. Channels like the Sidemen basically get 10 million views of video on their Among Us series, but even take it one step further and remove the game from the equation, you have these Among Us in real life videos, which is exactly what you'd imagine, stripping the game back to its original format and playing it, well, in real life. There's a Russian channel called Dimma getting just an ungodly amount of views, and even the hugely successful Jubilee channel, which has just exploded in popularity over the last few years, follows a similar style of this uninformed majority versus informed minority when they're doing their spot the mole videos. That's basically the same style. It's kind of different, but it's also kind of the same. And these were successful video series when they first came out a few years ago, but they're still hugely successful all these years later. That's unheard of. I've been doing YouTube for almost 10 years and you have to keep adapting. People get bored of just doing the same stuff over and over again. Except with this, people just watch this. Anyway, these are just a few of the most successful examples of this. They are by no means the first or the only ones to ever do it. This has been a format that's been around for years. What I want to know is, why has it become so successful of late? And to answer that, we need to delve into the long, rich history of the social deduction game, which doesn't exist. The first social deduction game on record that we know about was played less than 40 years ago. That is a fact that is genuinely shocking to me. Almost any other classic game has ancient origins going back like years and thousands of years ago. You know, like chess goes back to 6th century India. And, you know, it wasn't exactly the same game as it is today, but even the modern rules of chess can be traced back to like 500 years ago. Playing cards are suggested to have been invented in China 1,000 years ago, and famous games like blackjack and poker have been around since the 17th and 18th centuries. And when broken down, a social deduction game is so much more simple than these. It's about as simple a game as they come. If you have a large enough group of people, it doesn't require anything other than the ability to communicate with one another. And also, I guess, a willingness to lie to one another. So how did this not exist until the 80s? To answer that, we are going to have to go a little bit further. Back to 1920, what is considered to be the start of the golden age of crime and detective fiction, with most notably Agatha Christie releasing her earliest novels, bringing the format of the murder mystery to the mainstream. Now, I obviously should put it out there, I wasn't around in the 1920s, so I don't technically know how popular murder mystery books were before Agatha Christie, but I also don't think there is an author as synonymous with a genre of fiction as Agatha Christie is with whodunits. And according to Guinness World Records, she is the best-selling fiction writer of all time, believed to have sold an estimated 2 billion copies in 44 languages. So I'm going to take a little bit of a leap and say she massively helped popularize this genre, and the murder mystery movie genre followed suit. The first non-silent murder mystery movies were released in 1929, and it boomed into popularity in the 1930s. Again, just look at this Wikipedia list of murder mystery movies. You can see where the boom happens. And it was in amongst this where the rise in murder mystery games began. And while it's not entirely clear what came first or when it officially started, one of the first examples is a party game called Wink Murder, which has a familiar format. Players sat in a circle, and in this case, one player is secretly selected as the murderer, and they can then kill other players by winking at them, while the other players have to spot the murder before everyone gets winked at and murdered. Following on from this, in 1937, Jury Box was released, which is widely considered to be the first ever murder mystery game. If you haven't heard of this game before, it's essentially like a role-playing game where the players pretend to be jurors. Like, there's one person who gets to read a case on a printed card, and then everyone else, the jurors, have to work out who the suspect of the murder was, if it was a murder. It's kind of a murder mystery game. Before finally, in 1949, when Cluedo, or Clue, came out, the first murder mystery board game. And according to Hasbro, as of about 2 years ago, it is the second most popular board game in the world, I'm assuming only behind Monopoly, having sold more than 150 million boards. I mean, you know what they say, death sells. I joke, but there's clearly a part of the human brain that is naturally intrigued by someone dying under mysterious circumstances and having to work out what happened. And interestingly, around this same period of time, psychology as a field of study was finally gaining some legitimacy and popularity. And in 1986, following this golden age of psychological research, a man named Dmitry, or Dimma Davidoff, was studying psychology at the University of Moscow, and as a way of tying in his psychological research with teaching high school students, created a game called Mafia, which I'm willing to guess you're going to find the rules somewhat familiar. To begin, you prepare a deck of cards, paper, pencils, and at least 6 players. The first step is to divide the players into 2 teams. Each player gets 1 card from the prepared and shuffled deck, secretly looks at the card's color, and returns the card to the deck. During the silent period, the players who got black cards should open their eyes, raise their heads, and look at each other. Mafia are the players who saw each other and therefore know each other. Honest people are the players who saw nothing, don't know each other, and don't know who the Mafia members are. This is the only advantage of Mafia. They know each other. At any moment, any player may put another player in the suspected to be Mafia position. If the majority of players, not counting the accused, votes for guilty as member of the Mafia, the suspected player is sentenced to death and is out the game until the end of the round. The game ends when there are no shots during Mafia night or all honest people have been eliminated. Start again. And this short document with the rules on it that doesn't even exist on the internet anymore outside of archiving sites managed to spread around the entire world. Firstly, with the help of Andrew Plotkin, a well-regarded interactive fiction writer who rebranded the game to Werewolf and really helped it grow in popularity. And secondly, as we came into the new millennium, the game was adapted for online play. It's believed that the first ever game was played on an online forum called greylabyrinth.com, and this then spawned into its own website, mafiascum.net, an online Mafia forum still open to this day. And as I've touched on, from there the game has just grown and grown and grown. So you're probably wondering, why am I being so mysterious about this dimma Davidoff character? Why have I blurred out his face? And why didn't I divulge any extra information about the creation of the game? The truth is, this isn't a photo of dimma Davidoff. This is literally just an AI-generated image of a Russian man. Because dimma Davidoff is a complete enigma. He claims to be the creator of Mafia, a story corroborated by Andrew Plotkin, the creator of Werewolf, and various other journalists who have spoken to dimma Davidoff over the years. And I'm inclined to take their word on this and believe that this is a real human being that exists, but this man has no digital footprint at all. Like, there is one photo of him online, also from the 80s, that he provided to the World Radio Show for an article written in 2014. There is pretty much no record of him on social media, and by pretty much, I mean, there's a single Twitter account, which was made in 2012, has the handle @dimma_davidoff, doesn't follow anyone, and made one tweet saying, 25 years of the Mafia game, workshop is on, which is literally just promoting a Kickstarter he was doing for a workshop in how to make games like Mafia, which I guess provides us with a second, maybe more recent photo of him, at least half of his face. Outside of that, he doesn't have a Facebook, an Instagram, or even a LinkedIn account. Like, don't get me wrong, he's got a popular enough name that there are other people with similar names, but they mostly spell it Dmitry with an I and Davidoff with a V, which isn't the way he spells it himself. His only other social media appearance is on theglobe.com, which, if you haven't heard of theglobe.com, it's a really old social media. Like, I'm talking like 1998 old, and it's been defunct since like 2008. It failed miserably, which is crazy because it came up with the idea before like MySpace or Facebook were even trying it. But he had an account on it, and that's actually where he posted the original Mafia rules. And if you can't tell, I find dimma Davidoff fascinating. I mean, I set out making a video about this game format, expecting it to have like historic origins, only to find out the creator of the game is most likely still alive today. I mean, I don't actually know his whereabouts at this very moment, but he was at university in 1986, so, you know, he's probably in his late 50s right now. He's also mysterious. I found an email address that he most likely used in the 90s and sent him an email asking if he wanted to like do an interview for this video or even just share a line, a quote, a nugget of wisdom. As you may have expected, he didn't reply. Which actually, that's another interesting thing about him. This man is notoriously hard to interview. He has conducted a few interviews over the years, most notably with Margaret Robertson and Wired in 2010, and I'm just gonna quote them here. At first, he refused to talk to us at all, eschewing phone, email, or even instant messaging. And he only agreed to meet Wired within World of Warcraft. And even once they got him in the interview, he was difficult to talk to. I mean, Margaret describes there as being a 4-minute silence at one point during their conversation. He didn't want to reveal any personal details about himself or his childhood. Ask him how old he is, and he says, in World of Warcraft, I would say I'm a level 11. And when asked about his current life, he said, I hope you skip these questions in the print. Which, for what it's worth, I think he's totally entitled to be like this. I just also think it's a really interesting and kind of hilarious insight into his character and personality. And from reading all of his interviews, a picture of who dimma Davidoff really is starts to take shape. So let me introduce you to dimma Davidoff, born in 1967 in Kamensk-Uralsky, a small Russian city with a population of somewhere around 100,000 people and less than 100 miles from where the Kyshtym disaster took place at the Mayak nuclear station 10 years earlier. This may not seem that relevant to the video, but the Kyshtym disaster was a nuclear plant accident that happened in 1957 and was the most dangerous nuclear accident ever at the time. And almost 70 years on, according to the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale, it's only behind the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 and the Fukushima disaster in 2011. The reason I bring this up is because the Kyshtym disaster was kept a secret by the Soviet Union for almost 4 decades. kids. And I feel like this illustrates the sort of regime that Dimma was raised in, and therefore might give some insight into why he would create a game like this. And while he doesn't like talking about his childhood and being raised in the Soviet Union, in an AMA with MafiaUniverse.com in 2017, he does reveal that the Stalin purges were an influence when making Mafia, saying if an honest person tried to find bad guys, it would lead to the deaths of a lot of innocent people. And this seems to be a sentiment he's shared with various journalists he's spoken to over the years. Alina Simone wrote after Dimma spoke with the World Radio Show in 2014 that he actually designed Mafia in part as a means of understanding the bloody history of the communist regime, changed the word Mafia to KGB, and the game becomes a metaphor for the Stalin era. And in her article for The Guardian in 2016, reiterates, when Davidoff was growing up, most Soviet games were inspired by the us versus them dynamic of the Cold War, but Davidoff wanted Mafia to serve as a metaphor for the darkest years of the communist regime, when anyone, your boss, your neighbor, your lover, could be an informant. And I believe Margaret Robertson from Wired reached this same conclusion in 2010, even if he was reluctant to speak to her, saying, at its heart, perhaps inevitably for a game created by a psychology student who came of age under a regime that hushed up a massive nuclear disaster for more than 30 years, it answers the question of whether knowledge is power. However, I think a thing to remember, especially with this becoming a staple of reality TV in recent years, is that the game was originally created as an educational game. He created it as a way to try and teach high schoolers, and this is something he's reiterated since day one. I mean, I think it's his first ever public statement was to Seacoast Online and Aaron Davis in 2006, responding to a middle school in New Hampshire investigating the game and the psychological effect it had on kids, where he defended the game, saying the inspiration of the game came when thinking about how people work together in groups and the realization that their past experiences and disagreements will influence the choices they make together, and arguing one of the purposes of it is to teach kids to distinguish right from wrong. In order to win it, one has to become an honest citizen. And as recently as his AMA in 2017, he says Vygotsky's theory was the inspirational framework for Mafia. Which makes sense, because Vygotsky's theory is all about how different people learn things differently, and he's trying to get through to these high school kids. And he says, at first he was trying to give a few students a common hidden information and asked others to guess what it was, before realizing that it didn't matter what they know, as long as only they know they are together. Which again is just this simple idea of the informed minority versus the uninformed majority. Bringing us back to the present day. I honestly think the recap there just took half the video, but hope you're enjoying it. Please leave a like if you're enjoying this video, and subscribe and check out my Patreon. I don't know, do that please. Anyway, the social deduction game has been created, and it is just growing in popularity, something maybe only Dimma himself realized it was going to do, because he has persisted that he knew it was going to be a hit, saying as soon as he created it, he understood that Mafia would become worldwide popular. First, it spread among the children and the students whom he taught, and after a few tweaks were added, it became wildly popular with his friends, and that he never doubted it would become a global hit. I think most notably with Among Us in 2020, but widely being called the most popular game in the world, and some sources claiming it had 500 million active users at its peak. And a lot of this success is generally seen as a result of the lockdowns in 2020 and credited to YouTubers and streamers playing the game, because arguably this was one of the best ways to socialize without breaking any of the social distancing rules in place around the world. But this also only tells half the story, because this was also massively popular to watch. Almost all of the biggest gaming creators were getting in on it, and honestly, a lot of the non-gaming creators were getting in on it too. Like, if you weren't there for it, it's really hard to explain how big this was. At the time, YouTube itself reported on Among Us' surge in success, disclosing it achieved over 4 billion views in September 2020 alone. And before the 2020 US election, even political figures were getting in on this game, with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar playing with Hassan Piker on Twitch to try and get young people to go out and vote. But most interestingly, as we've covered, this has outlived the lockdown, with Among Us videos still being massively popular in 2025, and the Traitors equally achieving new heights just this year. Meaning this isn't the full story, leaving the question, why? Why do we love watching people play this game? And if you want the simple answer that doesn't entirely answer the question, it's entertaining. It's not actually that complicated. This is essentially an interactive murder mystery game, and as I've already covered, from Agatha Christie to the film and gaming worlds, and even to the current obsession with true crime videos and podcasts, the murder mystery genre is one of the most successful genres of fiction from the last 100 years. And let's just say, I don't think it's a coincidence that in almost every version of this game that I can find, when someone is eliminated by either being removed by their own teammates or being removed by the traitors or the imposters or the Mafia, they're not eliminated, they are murdered.
Who should they murder first?
Murderers.
Maybe that's just a small theatrical element, but for me, it really helps explain why we get so invested in it. For the storytelling. Now, I understand I can't speak for everyone here, but the main reason I watch anything is for the storytelling. I mean, I watch a TV show for the storytelling. I watch a movie for the storytelling. I watch someone play a video game for the storytelling. I even watch sport for the storytelling. When the storytelling is good, you immediately get sucked into the narratives. You start building parasocial relationships with the characters, whether they're real or fake. And then you want them to achieve their goals and succeed in what they're doing. And so many great building blocks for making a good story are just implemented into the structure of a social deduction game. And I know I've been comparing them to murder mysteries, but realistically, there's no mystery to it when you're watching it. It's so much more than that. I mean, what I think makes it so fascinating is that there's no good guys or bad guys like with a typical murder mystery. You're just watching regular people take on these roles and playing characters as a way to try and win the game. You're getting the drama of seeing friends and family lie and backstab each other, but then there's also maybe even more of a comedic angle to it when someone embarrassingly blunders and gives the game away. And you'll be shocked at how quickly you start siding with the so-called quote-unquote bad guys, and the entertainment becomes watching them spin this web of lies and deception. Even though these people have consented and it's only a game, we see how fast real emotions become involved, and yet we relish in seeing the bad guys successfully throw the good guys under the bus. And the players get so deep in it that it seems as though they've forgotten they are merely players in a game that they chose to play. I mean, I'm watching the latest season of the UK Traitors, and there are literally multiple contestants crying and pleading and begging their teammates to trust and believe them, which, to bring it back to the psychology of it all for a second, it's almost Stanford Prison-esque, which, if you don't know the Stanford Prison experiment, it's a very famous and shocking experiment that was conducted in 1971 by researcher Philip Zimbardo and colleagues, providing a dark and shocking expose on how situational circumstances can affect behavior. When a select few test participants were given the role of prison guard in a mock prison environment, their treatment of the prisoners quickly became dehumanizing and abusive within a matter of days. Zimbardo himself stated that this experiment stood to shine light on ordinary college students could do terrible things. Watching these normal people become villainous and lie so casually in front of our eyes is almost a morbid form of entertainment in its own right. But ultimately, like with any reality show, the main thing I want to see is someone playing the game well. If someone's a good liar, I'll start rooting for them. But equally, if someone's good at working things out and catching the liars, they're worth rooting for as well. And despite this all having quite a repetitive structure, every round manages to play out differently, even when you do just have the same group of people playing and just switching the roles around, with the reactions and strategies changing as people refresh their strategies from round to round. However, with this said, it doesn't also come without its criticisms. And there is a fatal flaw. The better you are perceived to be at this game, the worse you become at this game. Essentially, what I mean by this is that if you are perceived to be very clever and convincing, you are the most likely person to be eliminated by both the bad guys and the good guys, because you're a threat. This is something that Dimma Davidoff himself reflects on happening. He said, for the first 10 or so years, I was always killed first. Also adding, I would say skills do not matter so much in the Mafia game. Any newcomer could beat super experienced players. And in a way, this could be perceived as a good thing, because it makes the entry level for the game a lot lower, making it more inclusive for everyone to play. But when you're specifically watching it, I do think it creates a major problem, because it makes the most beneficial strategy to kind of not really say anything or play dumb, and therefore the more talkative, interesting characters that you want to root for because they're good at the game get eliminated first, and when you get to the later rounds of the game, you're stuck with the less interesting, less good players at the game, ironically. And that's what brings me to what I suspect might be my unpopular take here. The more I watch it, the more I love the extra crazy roles that can come into play. Like, if we just go back to the original game that we started this video with, but slightly change things. So instead of there being 3 people on the opposing team, we only have 2, and a third person in a neutral role called the Jester. This neutral role means they are on neither team and have a solo mission to get voted out by everyone else. Now, once again, you obviously don't know who the Jester is or who the 2 players killing people are, but suddenly, you have to play the game much more cautiously. You can't just vote someone out because they're being suspicious anymore, because what if they're intentionally trying to be suspicious because they want to get voted out? And what if the killers, though, are also intentionally being a bit suspicious because they want you to think that you can't vote them out? And the Jester is my favourite example of an extra role because, personally, from watching it, I think everyone's a bit more laid back when the Jester role is in play. Firstly, it means the killers don't have to try so hard to be avoided. They can actually make mistakes and still kind of get away with it. And it also means that the people in the good guys team aren't so aggressive with their accusations towards the killers because, again, they don't want to vote out the Jester by accident. But it's also only one example of an extra role. There are so many extra roles you can do. You can have medic or guardian angel roles to help people from getting murdered, seer or sheriff roles to help catch the killers, or even double agent roles to try and help the killers. There are countless roles that can be added into this game and, in my opinion, make it a lot more interesting, at least when they're not gone completely over the top and used in moderation. However, I will just say here that my opinion on the matter is kind of worthless here, and Dimma Davidoff himself disagrees with me. He says that he tries to avoid power roles as he believes the whole point of Mafia is to take power away from those who are in the know or the informed minority. And given that it's his original format without all these extra roles that's achieved all the success in recent years, I think I'm gonna have to accept there's a reason why this is an unpopular opinion. But also, when we return to his reasons for creating the game, I think we finally start to get the full picture. He designed Mafia in part as a means of understanding the bloody history of the communist regime. Davidoff wanted Mafia to serve as a metaphor for the darkest years of the communist regime, when anyone, your boss, your neighbor, your lover, could be an informant. And when we once again revisit what happened in 2020 that might have led to this, there are far more factors at play than just the pandemic and the lockdowns. I mean, it's a time where historically you would have expected people to come together, but they didn't. There was a rise in misinformation, conspiracy theories, there were protests and riots, and studies in America from 2022, a few years after, firstly by the Pew Research Center, have found public trust in government has reached new historic lows, and then another study by Gallup found that the average confidence in major US institutions has reached a new low. And finally, a study by NORC's General Social Survey found Americans are suffering more than ever from a lack of trust in their fellow humans, with the amount of people saying people can be trusted almost halved in the last 50 years. And a similar study by Oxford University in the UK found that there are worryingly high levels of mistrust in society, with only 13.7% of people describing themselves as very trusting. So should we be surprised that watching people lie to each other has become our favourite pastime? Does it help trivialize the sad realities of the world? Maybe, but I like to be more positive than that. I guess I'm in the minority now, but I do consider myself to be a trusting person, and I like to think that this game will have the impact that Dimma Davidoff intended it to have, and will be used as an educational tool, especially with younger audiences being exposed to it from such a young age on TV and online. Hopefully it will help kids to distinguish right from wrong, so they can become good and honest citizens who can take responsibility for their own actions and be proactively good. I just want to say a huge thank you to Kayla AC, Jacob Aneshka, Jonathan, Ben, and Will for supporting me on Patreon. You can also check out my Patreon in the link in the description down below. And yeah, I guess that wraps up this video. This was kind of different. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I don't imagine many people actually get this far into the video, so if you happen to be watching, you are one of the very few watching this bit at the end. Yeah, also, if you have any thoughts about this, just let me know. What did you think? Okay, don't be mean. Just let me know what you thought. Okay, thanks for watching.